Hello and welcome to SiGMA TV and the executive interview series featuring the Philippine electronic gaming operator DFNN. I'm Yanni and it is such a pleasure to be sitting with the chairman and executive director, Mr. Ramon Garcia, together with CEO Mr. Calvin Lim. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Yanni, good evening and welcome to our humble offices.
Thank you for having us.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me to your office at the Philippine Stock Exchange. And we're here to speak about what's currently in the pipeline for DFNN as well as what some of your future plans are. But before we dive in, can you just give me a brief history of your company and how it's grown in the span of decades you've been here, Mr. Ramon?
Well, this is truly a story that befits a startup company. It really started as a idea. I had come from the background of obviously the capital markets, the Philippine Stock Exchange, which, as you can see, is still close to my heart. And we had gone from an open outcry system, which is basically no technology, to actually, we own the company now that started the first automated trading system for the stock exchange. Eventually, we merged the two exchange order books into one exchange, which you took from the Makati and the Manila Stock Exchange to become what is today your Philippine Stock Exchange. Having headed the computer committee of the exchange, and again, loving the exchange itself, its rules, owing a lot of my experience to the learnings I've had from my peers in the exchange, I found it odd that as the Philippines, where we had such great talent, we have lots of Filipino IT talent, that we were paying foreigners huge amount of money at that point, $2,000 a day in per diem. And I said, why can't Filipinos do this? And eventually, yes, I sat down with my wife on still at that time, the old type of word processor, typed out a random business plan that was based that Filipinos can compete with the rest of the world. And with that, from a three-man office, we went from a garage to a Regis, to eventually growing. We had the friends and family rounds that came in. One of my earliest investors is a good friend of mine, John Henry Lulier, obviously of Cebuana Lulier. We took in some institutional money after that. And again, we're quite happy to be the first to do an IPO on the Philippine Stock Exchange using the newly created listing rules of the second board, which at that time I was also part of the listing committee, and I saw the process of the amalgamation of getting the best rules from Singapore, getting the best rules of the London Stock Exchange, and then harmonizing it and bringing it here. Since then, you've seen a lot of other tech companies follow in our path, and that means we're building an industry. And today, at a certain point in the development, I thought it was time to pass the baton to someone much younger and again, move on to bigger things. I haven't left the company, but it has allowed us to unlock the value of some of our subsidiaries, such as iWave and Hatch Asia, which I think we're going to watch for the next big thing.
That is such a phenomenal journey. All right, so I believe that DFNN had received a license to operate an online gaming platform for the domestic Philippine market. How exciting is that, and what are your short to long-term plans moving forward?
Well, again, I have to go back and clarify that prior to my CEO coming in to look at the plans. But the most important part is within our laws, through the E-commerce Act and so forth, we are actually, or the government is mandated to use these type of channels. Secondly, when we had acquired this, because we did not initiate the contract, we had acquired this company with the contract, which included within their contract the ability to do remote gaming, which is fantastic. And I think the first instance they had used it was during the term of President Arroyo, who was also a very inspired leader at that time. And they launched sports betting online. So fast forward to this administration and, to see yourself as the third largest contributor to government coffers. And due to this pandemic, the illegals come in to supplant and take away what is rightfully Filipinos' ability to do charity, to do disaster recovery, to even help for the vaccination, and bring that money offshore must be a terrible feeling, because that is the third largest contributor of government coffers. So we're quite happy that they have allowed our group, who I guess had passed their scrutiny, because we do service the banking industry, we service and have helped, similar to the PAGCOR outlets, 200 member brokers, some of them to deal with the pandemic by using our technologies to trade online, and I'm sure you've heard has had tremendous growth, and that our track record, being a IT company, had stood for itself. So it is really exciting. Now, for the plans going forward, I'll have to turn you over to the CEO of DFNN.
Well, it's a really exciting time for one of the reasons that I brought in, having looked at the licenses that we can achieve, is this mobile provision to be able to go online, right? So, but let's take a step back. We need to understand the role of DFNN, because the license is actually not a part of DFNN. DFNN, as a publicly listed company in the IT sector, develops the platform and has several business verticals. And one of the industries that we service is the e-casino. While we develop the platform internally, so that means the IP belongs to us. What happens then is that we supply the platform to the license holder. That's what Ramon mentioned, IEST. And that platform allows the independent operators, the e-casinos, to be able to deliver this platform and the service to all the customers. So then comes the whole COVID situation, where the outlets, for us, we are similar with the retailers as well, where there is a lockdown, where there is not many movements are allowed, and therefore a huge need or a demand for online or for remote communication. That's one. Similarly with online gaming, where we are considered as the entertainment industry, right? So all the casinos are closed. So what happens next? Automatically, when there's a demand, they gravitate towards a offshore. I regard them as the offshore websites or offshore operators. And as what Mr. Garcia mentioned, is that there is no proper taxes being paid, because all the money are being channeled outside, right? Outside of the country, number one. Number two, there's no actual customer protection. And there are so many negative effects when there is no regulation for industries such as us. So Parkour then came out with a whole brilliant idea. And they came up with this label, they call it Live Shots, where it's an extension of the licenses that several operators, such as ourselves and as well as the integrated resorts, are allowed to provide. Of course, it's what I claim is it's not a full-on approval, because certain restrictions are required. For example, like the deposits and withdrawal needs to happen at the outlet itself. So it's a place where regulation is required, but we're looking into I would say, hopefully a long-term hand in hand with the regulator, so that we don't over-regulate. Once we over-regulate, it kind of restricts what the whole intention of having this platform is. So yeah, that's basically the plan moving forward. Also looking into addressing other areas of the online gaming, such as sports betting and live dealer and so forth.
That is excellent. And how about during the pandemic? How have you adjusted your internet gaming cafes to continue operating, and how's the business performed?
Yeah, it was a significant change because it was just a lockdown for all outlets. This is consistent with all retailers as well. So when the industry slowly opened, there were requirements such as the elderly, the senior citizens are not allowed to enter. There is a curfew, and as well as there is a occupancy limitation. But to understand the customer behavior and what's different from us and other retailers is that the customer comes in, choose its preferred location and terminal, sits down and interacts very rarely with the cashier and just the individual and the terminal itself. So in that sense, it is adhering to a lot of social distancing requirements that the IATF and Parkour actually puts the restrictions in place. In terms of performance-wise, in comparison to pre-COVID days, we are far from the actual number, but it has been improving, and the introduction of Parkour's live shots and in-play for our label has been very, very promising. So we look, in all honesty, will take at least a year to recover back to original numbers.
And with the flight of Pogos leaving the country, do you see this as an opportunity for DFNN, or is this a trend that is not good for the country?
I see everything as an opportunity for DFNN. I think even as Calvin had said earlier, while you had these hindrances, DFNN is much more than online gaming. I think that separates us from other companies. We are actually digital. So in essence, the fact that today we were able to help a lot of the member brokers continue their trading despite having the same challenges that we had in the gaming industry is a testament that at least you should feel secure we can handle transactions. We also do that for the Philippine banks. We were able to do that for Japan's largest consumer finance company while we were at home. So I think that should bring us comfort. Now, the Pogos have a different dynamic, right? That is perhaps a short-term focus, I would think, Calvin. And the reason here is very simple. The Chinese government had been making moves to perhaps curb what they may feel should not be correct actions. The Philippines had passed certain taxes that did not make the business viable, which recently has been overturned in a Supreme Court ruling. But let me tell you where the opportunity is, okay? And this is always where the opportunity is. What's happening in the Philippines in the pandemic is happening all over the world. Coffers from different governments are being depleted from vaccines, support for salaries, medical. And guess what? Every region in the world is going digital. And like the BPO industry in the Philippines, and again, the problem with sometimes our views as Filipinos is we're too down on ourselves. And we should go back to that positivity that the Filipino can. I remember when we first had the same exact question about the BPO industry. The number one question was, come on, Philippines, how can you compete with India? And guess what? Who's number one now in call centers and so forth and so on? Recognized. So going back to Pogos, the Philippine government, PAGCOR, was on the right track. Let us not focus our attention that perhaps it was a percentage geared to a country that is a neighbor of ours. But with every country having to go online, every single state legalizing sports betting online, lotteries online, casinos online, from Europe, South America, Africa. Guess what happens? These all become BPO industries and they all come back to the Republic of the Philippines. So it's our chance to nurture it, right? And that's where I believe it is an opportunity. And since we control, unlike other companies, our own intellectual property, I think we can maximize on that. As the Chinese say, right? The Chinese symbol for crisis and opportunity are the same. So we just tend to look at it as opportunity, considering Chinese New Year is coming up soon.
Yes.
Right?
Masterful insight, Mr. Ramon. And I saw in your recent news that your company, through Hatch Asia, just acquired the Silver Heritage Group with casinos in Vietnam and Nepal. What are the international plans that you have there?
Well, we have to make a very clear distinction, guys. You know, it's nice that everybody says this company had casinos historically and all that. That's fine, but that's not DFNN's strength, right? We made very sure that what we did in Australia, again, was pioneering for Filipino companies, right? Very much the same way Andrew Tan. Obviously, when I go to Madrid, it's such an honor to see a Philippine flag on the tallest building in our former colonial master, right? But on a smaller scale, what we did is we ensured that we have no liabilities from the past business of former Silver Heritage. And we entered into a process called a deed of company assignment, which means the listing was taken over by us, of which we will now go back to the Australian Stock Exchange and recapitalize the company with our plans. But again, what does this mean for Filipinos? It is the first shot across the bow, so to say, that Filipinos can now raise money anywhere in the world. Pre-pandemic, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia was growing at 7-8%, second only to China in growth. Australians had no access to that growth. Hopefully, by what we put in Hatch Asia, when this pandemic is over, they will actually now have access to the growth in Asia. So again, we like doing things that are slightly different, slightly things that people said can't be done. But I guarantee you, since we've done it, I've already gotten calls for help. There will be other Filipino companies who will try to list on the Australian Stock Exchange as well, which is good.
Yeah, I want to add something to that. When I evaluated what are the strengths in DFNN and its group, it came to, and of course, because I'm not local, right? So, and my experiences.
So he has a different perspective, which is good. It's what we call a breath of fresh air, right?
Well, I've worked at overseas, and obviously, and it came to me that it is the right time for this company to go abroad. You see, and this is what we're doing with the RTO in Australian Stock Exchange, and not only that, but Singapore Stock Exchange for iWave, our subsidiary of DFNN. It's a very good stepping stone for this opportunity. Yeah. I also want to add something to the earlier question that you asked about Pogo. we need to understand what this Pogo industry is and try to look at the historical, the online gaming presence in the Philippines. Pogo was actually created by Parkour in about 2016 and 17. But however, online gaming has been in operation in the Philippines for many years before. And they were under a different jurisdiction at that point of time. Moving forward, when there was a bit of stability with the Pogo under the Parkour, we can look at it as a foreign investment because it is an industry where there is a huge demand in many countries and therefore needs to look for a place to operate. And it was really unexpected to see, and the numbers being reported to be in hundreds of thousands of foreign nationals coming into Philippines to work under the Pogo umbrella. And what is to be expected, how is to be managed, and because of the influx, automatically foreign investment coming in, the demand for local goods and services increases, which skyrocketed the prices, including property and so forth. And what happens next? It kind of pushes out, because we all know that a foreign expat earns slightly higher or even higher than the local Filipinos. And that kind of pushes out the middle income to the lower income gap in terms of certain goods and services and property purchase, for example. If that is managed well enough, it looks and it is more beneficial to the economy because it increases tax, for example. And that is, in my opinion, it's very, very important.
And again, I'm sorry to be repetitive, but I'm very pro-Filipino and very nationalistic, as you know. And, like I said, there was a focus on one ethnicity, and, Chinese, I'll call it straight out, perhaps a Chinese focus, which, they're our neighbors. There's nothing wrong with them being here. But I don't want to stress on that. If I can point to this building just past here, next door, you had a European company. They started with 5 Filipino programmers. They grew to 50 Filipino programmers and eventually grew to 120 and were still growing prior to the pandemic. And within the industry worldwide where they deploy their games, guess what? The first 10 games built, programmed, quality controlled by Filipinos were released worldwide. It's a very famous company and won many awards. I don't have the right since it's not my company, but can you imagine the skill sets learned by those Filipinos? So I would like to think that there's a benefit to all of this, and there is really no distinction. If you just take away the industry, it's still call centers. It's still programming, right? It's still customer support. It's still audit. It is still finance, right? That's been outsourcing here. So unfortunately, it was moved to a more capable regulator who's specific to the industry, which I think was correct, PAGCOR, rather than a generalist. But at the end of the day, you had to look at what it contributed to the growth. And unfortunately, in the world, the Philippines, I think is, and you know this coming from the gaming industry, right? Prior to that, he had exposure to the gaming industry. This is his second tour of duty in the Philippines, just to let you know. And the important part is every country in the world, I mean, Russia prior to them closing it down and moving it to the regions, Bulgaria, Romania, Italy, Spain, France, will come up with a domestic capability of intellectual property and people who build their own games. The Philippines, even having PAGCOR 25 years prior to 2008, and then now renewed after July 2008 for their next 25-year charter. It's only now that we started developing our own homegrown talent. But what does that mean? As we grow our market, as we develop the skill sets, we too, like the Israelis, the Swedes, the Japanese, and the Chinese, will now be able to export our talent around the world. Not only our people, but our own intellectual property, which will be played in regulated jurisdictions outside. Now that's something that somehow people missed. So there is always a benefit to these industries as they come in. It's money that would have otherwise gone into other countries. So today, like the CREATE law, which we brought down with the support of a fantastic Secretary of Finance and his team, supported by all the chambers, corporate tax rates from 30 down to 20 to make us competitive. We should always relook at how we can keep our regulations, especially even in PAGCOR, to bring them lower to compete with other jurisdictions who want to take the business away from us. And that's just good business sense, Yanni.
He made a very good point that the proper regulation, the regulator, PAGCOR, being the de facto in the gaming space, has gone through a lot to learn, especially when the pandemic hit and the borders stopped. It made all of us take a step back to understand and evaluate and address all the concerns that comes along with this benefit of an influx of a few 100,000 foreign nationals, you see. It affects culturally, socially, as if the foreign nationals are unable to communicate locally, there's a huge disconnect in terms of communication. Again, the regulators has identified all these issues, and it's addressing. Then once the borders reopen, I believe we are much more prepared to manage this influx of Chinese nationals.
Well, in line with this, do you see a brighter future for the Philippines and in Asia for land-based casinos and online gambling moving forward?
You know, we're not unique in this, and Calvin has seen it. I can only speak from the regulatory standpoint that we have now become a leader, being recognized. I mean, you can check with SiGMA, right? That good show and that good group. But throughout Asia, we're the first to actually legalize it and regulate it, which puts us on par with Europe, the most advanced country. So we are now the leader. Let's relish that. So I think there is growth, not only from our gaming side, which Calvin is aptly pushing and moving. The guy doesn't sleep. And that's the way we like it here. You know, we're always on the go. But just think about it from a BPO basis. Our country is going to grow to 150 million people, like Indonesia, which is what? The largest economy now in Southeast Asia. The Filipino billionaires, not to denigrate my Malaysian friends, there are more of them now than Malaysian billionaires. So there's a lot of promise for the Philippines. I am very glad that in many ways this administration, working on the earlier work of earlier administrations, has now captured this. I mean, we'll have a subway. I just love the fact that I can go now from Buendia all the way to North Expressway, right? And soon you've got Manny Pangilinan building. So these are all the right steps. Let's not misstep. And the gaming industry, let's grow it, because if we don't, the illegals will step in, and very few people know. The technologies that are in the gaming industry are one for one the same security you need in the telco industries for their prepaid cards, the same security that you need for your stock exchange to grow. So as you develop this talent will be pan-Asiatic and global in nature. So I hope we can accept that.
Let me add something to that as well. Looking at the gaming industry, and if you look at globally, both land-based and online, it's actually considered a very high growth industry. And in fact, I believe pre-pandemic, the numbers that was recorded, the growth in Philippines is about 20%. So that's significant. So looking at, and then of course COVID happened. So looking at the future, I believe that the numbers will be similar growth. But of course it seems that, and well, actually not seems, it is more skewed towards the online gaming side that will see higher growth than the land-based.
And I'm sure you've seen announcements like MGM buying the former company called GVC Gaming, right? So it's a merger of the physical as well as the online. But similar to the banking industry, the ATMs haven't disappeared. They still keep on opening bank branches. Your brokers haven't disappeared just because of online. It isn't a catch-all. But can you imagine if you marry the strengths of both? And that for me is going to be the magic. But the industry is going that way. We'll see. We'll see what happens. As far as we're concerned, we'll continue with our strengths. And again, gaming is there, and it is one of our core revenue generators. But we have a lot of other core revenue generators that are using the same skill sets. And this is what we want to highlight. Gaming per se is not something that has gone from the old way. It is out in the open, it is transparent, it is regulated, it is clean. So these skill sets we are using in the fintech environment. We are using it, believe it, on the national ID environment and on the payment solutions environment. So believe it or not, PAGCOR, including the new facial recognition they were doing, the banks are actually following suit. So that means PAGCOR is ahead of our universal banks in deploying this technology. How do you like that? And the first in the world, I would think, in the gaming sphere. So that's something to be said about our regulators. They are looking forward.
Amazing. Well, moving forward, I reckon you, Mr. Ramon, have arranged a video conference meeting with the legislative staff together with the SpaceX officials, discussing the initiative of the SpaceX to bring in the Starlink satellite broadband project to the country. This is indeed a wonderful news, and I would love for you to tell more about this project, what this technology would entail in the country, to the Philippine communications and broadband landscape, and as well as to the gaming industry.
You know, I've been getting this call ever since it came out that I had arranged those meetings, but I go back to the base, right? At the end of the day, for the Philippines to be a powerhouse, and I think there's no need for me to rehash the level we are in terms of internet connectivity, from saving human lives whenever there is a typhoon, a volcanic eruption, or an earthquake when telecommunications is not available, all right? To your banking, to your OFWs who are overseas, to your education, right? To your secure gaming. These are all aspects that the Filipinos now depend upon as much as light, water, and food. This is how we connect. And Filipinos, their life is connection. That's why we are one of the early adopters in the biggest SMS text capital in the world. That is why we're in the top 5 of Facebook, right? And Twitter, like Yanni, right? So the issue here is, how do we draw on these strengths? And unfortunately, we still have certain laws that hold us back from our true potential. In deference, our congressmen have passed it. It's now in the Senate. Hopefully they can do it. We ourselves are bridging our legislators with the technology companies. We do have a very strong relationship from our background. We're not a gaming company, we're an IT company, right? In Silicon Valley, and we will be hopefully bridging more of those companies whose names you know here in the Philippines. But that being said, it's really our senators now and legislators who should be the hero for the Filipino people, and to bring respectable companies such as those done by Elon Musk. We're just lucky that we had some foresight to do things like iWave, FinTech. You've got this fantastic zone that was passed called the Freeport area of Bataan with a new rule, which I will openly say will become the Silicon Valley of the Philippines. And you heard it here first. Check with me in 5 years, but Bataan will be the Silicon Valley of the Philippines with their new law passed. And the way we're going, these are all steps to strengthen our position. Now, it's not only Elon Musk. Amazon with Blue Origins will also launch their low Earth orbit satellite. And this is different from your old Inmarsat geostationary satellites. The latency will be very, very low, which means you will have dedicated speed of up to 100 megabits per second. So this is something that, I mean, you go to the beach, well, some people probably won't like that, but you go to the top of the highest mountain in our mountain provinces, to the most beautiful beach, right? Imagine being able to monitor our coral reefs because of this technology. Imagine being able to save and locate our fishermen that maybe have gone during a storm. Imagine the relief support when our military goes in and the telco towers have been knocked down. There's a lot the country can benefit from this. And right now, I don't want to talk about corporate. Let's just talk what's good for the country. Elon Musk company is being courted by the president of Indonesia. They want to put their launch pad being close to the equator. Every other country will court Amazon, Elon Musk, because they have the same problems. The news broke about Senator Pimentel and Grace Poe championing this. We got calls from Malaysia saying we have the same problems. How do we get in touch with SpaceX? right? So this is something that we as Filipinos, and come on, I'm sure you have Viber, Telegram, WhatsApp, right? And we need to be connected, right? That is the Filipino culture. So why should we be shy in being the first ones to get this technology? And I have friends. DFNN has historically been one of the companies, and this is a fact. When I started this company, we were first PillTel, then we got called in by Globe, then this small office next to my old office where I started DFNN, some tiny company called Smart Telecom called us in. It was myself, Wolfpack, Chica, Information Gateway, and said, hey, we want you to put content like jokes on Smart so we can grow Smart. Then we had this small company called Sun. Charles Lim calls me in, Mr. Garcia, we heard what your company had did for Globe, Smart, please help us in Sun. And they're all friends, right? So this is an industry we're building. It's not take from the other or cannibalize. This is a growth. So you have this great guy. Well, it's funny. You have two Dennis Uys, right? You have one for Ditto, who's putting up the telco way. You have another Dennis Uy from the North, Pampanga, who just launched Converge. Okay, these are growth industries, and the more the merrier. Now, if we are able to resolve these foreign ownership limits, can you imagine the valuation of these companies? Because we have a huge population, and the fund managers from abroad would love to have a stake in all these companies, which means they can spend more CapEx, more OpEx to improve their service for the Filipinos. It's a win-win-win situation. It's now up to our legislators to deliver the internet connectivity that Filipinos deserve so we can compete with our neighbors. And we don't do it, we will eventually be begging because the neighboring countries have already talked to these companies. It's better we're the first. Wouldn't you agree, Yanni?
Of course, I would. Yeah. Connectivity is life,
Louder again, what is that?
Connectivity is life.
I love it. And it's true, isn't it?
It is. Well, everything you just said, Mr. Ramon, is music to my ears. I love it. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Ramon and Mr. Calvin, for joining me here and taking the time to talk with me today. We look forward to watching your progress.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Yanni, and it was great being interviewed by you.